Hi guys, today we're going to look at outliers, what an outlier is, and then how we mathematically determine if we have an outlier in a data set. So definition of an outlier is something you've probably seen in math before, and it's pretty intuitive. It's an extreme value that's either much bigger or much smaller than the other data values in your set. Now that's a pretty ambiguous or vague definition, so we're going to look to today as a more mathematical test. Outliers can have a strong effect on the measurements of a data set, like mean, standard deviation, which is a measure of spread that we're going to learn how to calculate next. So if we find outliers, a lot of times we just toss those out of the data set if we have evidence that it is an outlier, and that's what we're going to look for today. And that test we're going to do is called the 1.5 times IQR criterion, and it's pretty straightforward. So here's our test. The test is based on, like we called in the last video, our middle 50% of data values are pretty normal values in the data set, which is the IQR. So our first step in this test is to find the IQR by taking third quartile minus the first quartile. Obviously, we need the 5-number summary in order to start this test. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to take 50% more and add it on to the IQR. So we're going to multiply the IQR by 1.5. And then we're going to take this quantity and we're going to add it to the third quartile, which is the right edge of the box in the box plot. And that's going to set an upper fence or an upper limit of what would be an acceptable data value. And then we're going to take that same number, 1.5 times the IQR, and we're going to subtract it from the left edge of our box plot, Q1. And that's going to be a lower fence or a lower limit for an acceptable value. Anything below that will be considered an outlier. So here's the test. We're going to go through a quick example. It's our pizza example from the last video we had. And we've got the box plot, which is drawn much better than the one I drew, and our 5-number summary right above. And so practical reason maybe why we might want to find outliers. If the owner of the pizza store decided that if they had any deliveries that were outliers on the high end, that would result in a $5 deduction from everybody's salary that night. So a little negative incentive for his employees. So here's our box plot, and here's our 5-number summary. And so we'll go right through the steps. I'll number them this time, but I don't usually number my steps. I just go through the calculation. I'm actually scooch that up just a little bit. And so our first thing is we're going to calculate the IQR. So our IQR in this problem, it's from Q3 to Q1. So IQR is 22 minus 15 is 7. Then we take that number, second step in that process, 1.5 times the IQR. So 7 times 1.5 is 10.5. And then now we're going to set our upper and lower limits for what would be acceptable. So 3 and 4, our upper limit. So our upper maximum value is Q3 plus 10.5, or Q3 is 22, so 32.5. Visually, we can see that on our picture. We're going 10.5 units from 22 this way to 32.5. So there's 10.5. And then in the other direction, we're going to do the same thing. So this is the thing we're going to do next. We're going to go 10.5 units this way. And obviously, there's no outliers in this data set on the low end. We can see that right off of our number line. So our fourth thing, our lower limit, is going to be Q1 minus 10.5. Same distance in the other direction. And so Q1 minus 10.5 gets us to 2.5. I'm sorry, 15 minus 10.5, 4.5. If only I had an eraser. Anyway, our acceptable range The range over which we're not going to find outliers is going to be all of our data values from our lower to our upper limits. So anything between 4.5 minutes and 32.5 minutes would not be considered an outlier. So when we look at our data values, our highest value is 30, so we would say clearly there are no outliers. With a 5-number summary, we have to be really careful. The only number we can see on the high end is the maximum value. There might be a bunch of 30-minute deliveries or a 29 or a 28. So if we're looking at the 5-number summary to determine outliers, you can't always see all the data values. So having the actual data set would be much more helpful in this case. But that's how you do the 1.5 times IQR criterion test to determine outliers.